Hey guys, it's coming in my review for A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. And what A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood is essentially about is we center not on Mr. Rogers, but on this character, Lloyd Vogel. He is someone who has become very bitter, very cynical in life, and just isn't really in that great of a place. And he is also this journalist that is chosen, and basically the person that he is chosen to make his next profile on is actually on Mr. Rogers. So he decides that he's going to give him a few interviews and things like that. But very quickly, he starts to learn a lot from him, and Lloyd really does start to change for the better, and that's really all I'm going to say. So, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood overall, I was very excited for this film, especially coming off the heels of Won't You Be My Neighbor last year, a documentary that I truly do think is one of the best of the decade, and one that just leaves you feeling so happy and leaves you feeling like you want to be like Mr. Rogers in that way. And going into this film, I was very excited that this wasn't going to be a complete, recreation of that. I was hoping that they would do something different, and they did. And overall, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood delivered pretty much in every way that I overall needed to. This is a really great film that I truly don't think is being talked about enough. But we'll get into it right now, starting off with the cast. And easily, that's one of the best things about this entire film. Everyone really is very well casted here. But of course, let's just get it out of the way. Tom Hanks, I mean, what is there to say about this guy that hasn't been said already? He's one of the best actors working today, but he also is just such a great character actor. And this film really reminds us just how great he is with playing figures like this. I mean, Fred Rogers is so iconic in that way, and he has a very specific dialect. He has a very specific way of going about things, and Hanks just completely nails it. He perfectly nails the whimsical and warmth and just everything you needed from Fred Rogers to be, while also simultaneously doing his own thing. He does have that charm, he does have that very mellow tone, but he also is doing his own thing here. And overall, I think it's one of his best performances to date. I was very impressed by what he does in this film. The film is already great, but whenever Hanks comes on screen, it just is at its best for sure, and at the very least, he needs to get some Oscar recognition here. I mean, I know that the Oscars have not been too kind to him over the years, but this is one that absolutely cannot go overlooked, because it can be very hard to portray this character and portray someone like Fred Rogers, and the fact that Hanks did it, but also didn't just try to completely redo everything he did and just be a complete replica and kind of do his own thing, that shows how he's on an even bigger level of craft than, you'd think he'd be. And I think overall he just completely killed it here, as expected, but even better than I think we were expecting him to be. And then someone else that's just not getting enough talk is Matthew Rhys, who, I mean, I've always adored since, like, The Americans and things like that, and he gives a really interesting performance here. It's a performance that very much is going to be overlooked because it's not nearly as showy as Hanks. This performance is very subtle. It's very internal and things like that, but he does a phenomenal job. There's a lot that Lloyd is keeping up boggled inside of him, and it's eating away at him pretty much throughout the entire movie, and eventually he does have to confront it, and you see how this really does transform him in that way, and I think Rhys just did such an incredible job, particularly in this one dream sequence that I really don't want to give away, but damn is he good there, and I think gave a very strong performance in this film for sure, one that truly is not getting talked about enough, and the dynamic between him and Hanks is so spot on. These two work so excellently together. They had a lot more scenes together than I really was expecting, and I just really loved seeing the bond between these two. They really do bring out the best in each other in that way, and I really thought they worked very well here. As far as the rest of the cast goes, everyone else does a really good job. Susan Kelechi Watson, I thought, was very well casted as Lloyd's wife, and then Chris Cooper is really good as Lloyd's father. Everyone really does do a great job here. I don't really think there's someone that wasn't giving it 100%, but really Rhys and Hanks really do anchor this entire film. But now let's get to the directing and the writing, which that is easy one of the best things about this film. Marielle Heller is the director that everyone was praising last year after Can You Ever Forgive Me, and I wasn't really, unfortunately, I didn't have that same sentiment because I wasn't really a big fan of that film. But now I see it. I totally see what people are talking about because she did an excellent job, I think, directing this film. And the best thing I think she did is that she was able to take the Fred Rogers that we know, but also do its own thing in that way. And I think the story that she's telling is very important, and her tone was very well done. This film is definitely a little bit more on the serious side for sure, but it also does remember to be a lot of fun. And it just feels very real, and the passion that was put into it. You can see how much Heller does care about this story, how much she really does love Fred Rogers, and you really just see that poured into the entire film, and I really can't praise her enough for that. I think her directing was so great here, and I can definitely see, like I said, why people have been praising her as much as they have, because I really do think she's a fantastic director in the way, and I'm definitely going to be on the lookout for her moving forward. I was very impressed by her directing here. The writing as well here is definitely very well done, because like I said, this is not the type of movie that you are expecting it to be. It's not really about Mr. Rogers, and I don't really have a problem with that very much at all, because I didn't think it was going to be. I mean, the trailers made it seem like it was going to be about Lloyd Vogel, so I don't understand why people are making it, surprised that it's not about Mr. Rogers in that way, unless they guess, I don't know, didn't watch the trailers, but again, the film is still kind of about him, because it's about the impact that he had on individuals. People like Lloyd, who were corrupt, who were broken in that way, and needed to be fixed, and had all of these demons that they just weren't facing. And Lloyd, what I love about him is that he's not actually a real person, but he very well could have been. Lloyd is the embodiment of someone that didn't think they needed someone like Mr. Rogers in life, and then completely changed for the better after meeting him. And they do a really great job of showing how much Mr. Rogers could just change someone, in such a visceral way. And someone like Lloyd, like I said, he's not particularly a bad guy. This is just someone who he's grown very disillusioned. There aren't a lot of things in the world that he is that appreciative of. He's a good guy. He's trying to be the best that he can, but at the same time, he has a past that very much does haunt him. And he's never really had an outlet to really let go of these issues. He's got very bad daddy issues. He's had a lot of issues with family and things like that. And just in general, he is very depressed in that way. And seeing someone like Mr. Rogers come in and really get him to confront these issues makes for a really good screenplay in that way. And I think the film does a really good job of getting us introduced to Lloyd, and then eventually transitioning us into his, transformation in that way. And it's a very subtle one. It's one that some people just aren't going to recognize. I've heard some people say Lloyd doesn't change at all, and I would very much disagree. There's a clear change between the beginning and end of the movie. He does go through a pretty big transformation, and I think they do a really good job with that. But especially, like I said, in this terrific dream sequence, which I don't want to give away, but it's probably one of my favorite scenes of the year, to be honest with you. It's so effective, it's so psychological, and it really does show what Lloyd has been through. It finally is him confronting certain things that didn't really think of, like something as simple as a childhood toy that he had, which felt pretty insignificant to him. Mr. Rogers brings a much bigger purpose to it, and we realize that there is a much bigger purpose to it that Lloyd wasn't really seeing, and I really did appreciate that here. But again, the film is very much respecting Rogers as well, and just the impact that he overall had on someone like Lloyd, which I really did overall appreciate here. And what the film's trying to say about things like abandonment, what the film's trying to say about the way that we process grief, but especially the way we process anger, I think is very interesting. And Won't You Be My Neighbor definitely did touch upon this, but it's even more, they doubled down on it even more in this film, showing how Mr. Rogers is someone that isn't a perfect person. He did have his own issues. It's just he had a different way of expressing himself and showing his anger than we do. He chose not to show it. He had different ways to process it. And similar to Won't You Be My Neighbor, I think there's a lot we can really learn from this movie. I think we can really look at the way that Mr. Rogers went about life and try to apply that to our everyday life. And obviously, I'm not saying that we need to be exactly like Mr. Rogers, but we should try to apply some of his philosophies. Rather than getting angry and taking out someone we love, why not just hit a few keys? Why not just swim a few laps? Things that seem pretty insignificant that might actually be good coping mechanisms for processing anger. And that's a lot of what this film is trying to get into. And I think overall they do a really good job with that. So I was very impressed by the screenplay. And seeing things like Lloyd eventually confronting his father, it's very effective in that way. You really do see what Lloyd has been through. You see how he is willing to finally make an effort to do something, and it definitely feels very rewarding in that way. The film does a really good job with never making it feel too sappy. I think they did a good job with that too, because this could be something that does come across very, saccharine in that way, but it always feels genuine, and that's something I really did appreciate about this film. So overall, I thought the writing here was very solid. The cinematography here, though, is fantastic. So much better than you would even expect it to be, especially when it comes to Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood as a show, which, without getting into too much, there's some parts of this movie that is structured like a Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood episode, and the aspect ratio will change, and any time that they use this visual cue, I thought it was really cool. I wasn't expecting them to do something like that, but it actually added to how much I was enjoying the film, but also how much they respected Mr. Rogers, and I just really appreciate the way that they went about that, and I thought it was just really great to see, and the way they recreate certain scenes from the show as well is spot on. I mean, just the sets and the look and feel, it all just felt right in that way. And again, I appreciate the fact this wasn't a biopic about Mr. Rogers, because it just made those things stand out more, and there was more they could get away with creatively. They didn't have to, follow all this checklist of things. It very much felt like they were doing their own thing, and that really does apply to the cinematography here. The score here is also fantastic, not just the music, which obviously is great, but the musical score itself, I thought was very effective, and I really did enjoy it overall, and it's minimal. It's not used a lot, but whenever it is used, I thought it was very effective in that way. And the editing, I think this film was very well paced for the most part. There are some moments, particularly in, I would say, the first 20 to 30 minutes, that did feel a little bit rushed to me, and I think it did take a little while to overall get going, but once it got great, it really did stay great in that way, and I think they did a really good job with that. So in terms of issues with this film, there are just a couple things that do bring it down from being one of the overall best of the year for me. First of all is that even though I did really love this, again, the visual cues of, using Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and kind of framing it like one, the movie actually starts out like it's an episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and I thought, okay, this is a really interesting way to tell this story. I was kind of excited to see how they were going to do it, and after a while, they don't really go back to it until the very end, and I understand why they did that, because they wanted to make it Lloyd's story, but I honestly would have liked it if the entire movie was structured this way. If we could have cut back to Mr. Rogers every so often and still keeping up that aesthetic, because there is a large portion of time where the film doesn't really, besides the transitions, which, like I said, are a really cool idea, and I really love the way they handled that, there isn't a lot that they do, with that. They kind of abandoned after a while, and I think they could have done a little bit more there. And also Lloyd as a character, as much as I did enjoy him, when it's eventually revealed what he's going through, I just needed a little bit more there. I needed to see a little bit more of what he went through. I think there needed to be a little bit more that he was struggling with, because after a while the film does feel a little bit too simplistic in that way, and that did bring it down just a bit for me. Again, when it's great, it really is great. But there just were a couple moments that it definitely did feel a little bit too simple for me overall. Also, in terms of some of the secondary characters in this movie, there isn't really a lot to them. It really is just Lloyd, his father, and Rogers who are developed. Lloyd's wife, for example, there really isn't much to her, very much at all, and I kind of feel like there was an opportunity to do so. There's something that's brought up in the third act of this movie that I kind of would have wanted to see more of. I would have liked just at least a scene of what was discussed here, and I feel there was a little bit of untapped potential there overall. But overall, Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood did pretty much what I needed to do. It captures the warmth and spirit of Mr. Rogers, but also telling its own story and how we can kind of go about his philosophy, and how just in general we really do kind of need him in our lives right now. We really do need someone like Mr. Rogers. We don't need Mr. Rogers, obviously, but we need someone that's like Mr. Rogers, that applies his philosophy, that is someone that can help us deal with the issues that we're feeling, and goes about in a way that we wouldn't expect them to. And I think that's something that this film just did very well overall, I very much did love this film. Hanks and Rhys especially are fantastic here. It deals with some really interesting and prevalent issues that I definitely really did appreciate. The directing by Marielle Heller is fantastic. The cinematography is way better than I ever would have expected to be, especially, like I said, those visual cues that I wasn't really expecting, but anytime they did it, I thought was really cool overall. So overall, I had a really great time with A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, and I'm definitely going to give it overall an A-. But over, guys, in my review of Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, let me know what you guys saw this movie overall. Love your thoughts on it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.